teach from a passage which is very difficult and highly misunderstood. And it's already read to us. Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude, because those who suffer in their bodies are done with sin. The misunderstandings or misinterpretation and practices that ensue from this is in that last phrase. Those who have suffered in their bodies are done with sin, which means, or which seems to imply that one way of getting rid of sin or living a holy life is to mortify your body, punish your body. That has given, this has given rise to many practices in the church, which is in the pattern of the other religions. Now you might have seen pictures of sadhus who stand on one leg like this. It is for it's a mortification of your body. Might have seen actually, or at least have seen in film or in pictures, sadhus sleeping on a bed of nails, right? Now, some of us do use acupressure chapels and acupressure boards. This is not that. It's just flat. What is that? Again, corporal mortification. Punish your body in order to become holy. Now, how many of you have read Dan Brown's I forgot it. Da Vinci Code? How many of you have read it? Yes. And there's a mention, or it circles around a sect or a Catholic group called Opus Dei. Opus Dei was banned. Saint Ecrivas group was banned for a while, and then they removed the ban as well. The reason is that they believe in corporal mortification, that is, punishing your body. And you might have seen that thing in the film or read the descriptions. They punish the body with a whip called cilicia, I think, and they have a whip with hooks on it. So if you do something wrong, you whip yourself until you bleed. You punish yourself, self-molestation. And then you do away, you cleanse yourself, your soul, your mind, your spirit, by punishing your body. Now, there are various variations of this. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Say, in some Christian groups in India and abroad as well, especially in South India, we have churches of pilgrim centers. People go there, and in some places they roll on the gravel all around the church a certain number of times. And that's a penance. See? And there are other people who make their rolling easy, and that is another way of serving God. That they put, there are youth organizations in the church that I know, they put sand on their way, so that when they roll, in this thing, it will be much more comfortable for them. And that is how they serve. I don't know how many of you seen it. See, this passage was understood because it says, those who suffered in their bodies have done with sin. Those who suffer in their body. So you should suffer in your body so that you get rid of sin. But that is not what this passage talks about. Because we have been preaching from Peter, I never imagined that I can preach this many sermons from these 5 chapters. But you remember the metaphor I used in the beginning? This is like Son Papadi, The first sermon I said, because this is like Son Papadi. Son Papadi is that sweet which is very much pressed, and you just take a layer, it comes out layer after layer after layer. Something, First Peter is something like that, a Son Papadi. Now, The point is, when we are preaching from this series, we saw in chapter 3, verse 14, and chapter 3, verse 17, it's all about suffering. This is about persecution. This is about suffering. This is about withstanding opposition, how to stand, how to oppose, how to survive suffering for the sake of Christ. What does 3:14 say? 3:14 qualifies the suffering. Do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened. See? Now, let me read from 3:13. Who is going to harm you if you are eager to do good? But even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Here is the suffering. And that suffering is suffering for doing what is right. Okay, let's look at 3 verse 17. Where it says, okay, it is better if it is God's will. If it is God's will to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. Here is a different type of suffering. This is not suffering or punishing us. This is a sort of suffering for doing what is right, for what is God's will, for what is what is according to the word of God, according to the will of God. So here Peter talks about people taking up suffering in order to avoid sin. That is the suffering that they are talking about. People will, there's a choice now. You have a choice. Either you suffer or you sin. When that difficult choice is given, you make a choice. And that choice is, no, I won't sin, but I will rather choose suffer. And that is the history, that is the story of the early Christians. Not only early Christians, but Old Testament even. Take the case of Daniel. He had a choice. Either do what the king's edict says, or be thrown into the den of lions. Now you have a choice, suffer or sin. A difficult choice between suffering and sinning. But Daniel chose to suffer than to sin. Now, the 3 young men in Babylon, they had a choice. Either thrown into the furnace or sin. That's a difficult choice. A choice between suffering and sinning. And they chose suffering. There's only 2 choices. They don't have 4 choices. See? A or B. Suffering or sin. Now, n number of Christians, God's children, were presented this limited choice. Suffer or sin. Take up pain or reject Christ. And these people had to make a choice, and that is choice of suffering. Let me put it the other way around. It is to break away from sin. To break with sin. Not just avoiding suffering, that is diluting the whole thing. Here you have to make a deliberate choice, and that choice is to break with sin. Break with sin. Now, I don't know how to explain that concept. And breaking with sin is suffering, or you have to suffer for that. Now, what Peter says here is, let me read that verse again. You have suffered, those who have suffered in their bodies have done with sin, can be paraphrased this way. Those who suffered in their bodies have broken away or broken with sin. Never to come back. Never to come back. I don't know whether you see, I can bring a lot of examples, but